My name is Emily Ashford, and despite everything I've achieved, I was never good enough for my family, but that night, everything changed. Before I share my story, let me know where you're watching from and hit like and subscribe if you've ever had to walk away from someone who refused to see your worth. The rain drummed against the windows of my corner office at Meridian Strategic Holdings, but I barely noticed. I was too busy reviewing the acquisition documents that would close my biggest deal yet. A $200 million pharmaceutical merger that had taken 8 months to orchestrate. At 32, I was the youngest senior partner in the firm's history. And tonight, I was about to surprise my father with news that would finally prove my worth. My phone buzzed. A text from my stepmother, Celeste. "Don't forget your father's 65th birthday dinner. 7 p.m. sharp, black tie, try to look presentable." I stared at that last word, presentable, as if my custom Armani suits and my Harvard MBA weren't presentable enough, as if being featured on Forbes 30 Under 30 wasn't presentable enough, as if single-handedly building a portfolio worth more than my father's entire real estate empire wasn't presentable enough. But tonight would be different. Tonight, I had something that would silence every dismissive comment, every condescending smile. Every time my father introduced me as my daughter, the one who works in finance or something, I opened my desk drawer and pulled out a small velvet box. Inside was a vintage 1962 Rolex Daytona, the exact watch my father had admired in an auction, cataloged 20 years ago but couldn't afford. He'd shown me the picture when I was 12, his voice wistful as he said, "Someday, Vian, when the business really takes off, I'll own something like this." The business had taken off. He'd built Ashford Properties into a mid-tier development company with projects across Virginia, but he'd never bought that watch. Instead, he'd spent his money on Celeste shopping sprees, my half-brother Trevor's failed startups, and a lifestyle that screamed new money desperation. This watch had cost me $180,000 at Sotheby's, worth every penny to see the look on his face when he realized his daughter, the one he'd never quite believed in, had bought him the dream he'd given up on. I pulled into the circular driveway of 1247 Magnolia Street, Charlottesville's most prestigious address. The Georgia mansion had been in my family for 3 generations, passed down from my grandfather to my father when I was 10. It was the house where I'd spent my childhood feeling like a guest, where family portraits lined the walls but somehow never quite included me in the center. The valet? Yes, my father hired a valet for family dinners now, took my keys with a professional smile. "Good evening, Miss Ashford. They're waiting for you in the dining room, waiting for me," as if I were late, though I was exactly on time, as if my presence was an inconvenience they had to endure rather than a daughter coming home for her father's birthday. The front door opened before I could knock. Trevor stood there, all prep school charm and inherited confidence, wearing a tuxedo that probably cost more than most people's cars. At 28, he'd never held a job that lasted more than 6 months, but he carried himself like he owned the world. "Vivian?" He pulled me into a hug that felt like a performance. "You look corporate." "Thank you." I wasn't sure if that was meant as a compliment. "Dad's been telling everyone about your little deal. Very impressive." The way he said little made it clear he thought my $200 million merger was cute. Like a child's lemonade stand, I followed him through the foyer, past the crystal chandelier my great-grandmother had brought from Vienna, past the oil paintings of stern-faced Ashford ancestors who'd built their fortune in tobacco and never let anyone forget it. The dining room glowed with candlelight, and I could hear the gentle murmur of conversation from the 8 guests my father had invited to celebrate. "Vivian's here," Trevor announced, and the conversation paused. My father, Richard Ashford, stood at the head of the table like a king holding court. At 65, he was still imposing, silver-haired, broad-shouldered, with the kind of presence that commanded attention. He taught me that presence was everything in business, though he'd never seemed to think I'd inherited it. "There's my daughter," he said, and I felt that familiar flutter of hope. Maybe tonight would be different. Maybe tonight he'd finally see me, Celeste, resplendent in champagne silk and diamonds, air-kissed my cheek. "Vivian, darling, you look so professional there was. That word again, professional, as if looking professional was somehow a character flaw. The other guests, family friends, business associates, people whose names I'd known since childhood, greeted me with the polite warmth reserved for the family member who'd chosen a different path. The successful one, yes, but the one who'd never quite fit in. "I heard about your merger," said Harrison Whitmore, my father's oldest friend. "Quite impressive, though I have to say, I don't understand half of what you young people do with all those numbers and computers. It's not that complicated," I said, settling into my chair. "We identified undervalued assets, leveraged synergies, and created a strategic partnership that will generate substantial returns for both parties." The silence that followed was deafening. I'd done it again, spoken in the language of my world, forgetting that here in the dining room my achievements were curiosities rather than accomplishments. "Well," my father said finally, "I'm sure it's all very modern, as if building wealth through intelligence and strategy was somehow less valid than building it through inherited connections and real estate development. But I had my secret weapon, I had the watch, and I had news that would change everything. Dinner was a masterpiece of Southern elegance. Prime rib, lobster thermidor, sides that probably cost more than most people's weekly groceries. The wine was a 1995 Chateau Margaux that I'd actually helped my father acquire through a contact at Meridian. He'd never acknowledged the connection, but I'd seen the appreciation in his eyes when he'd first tasted it as he moved through the courses. I listened to the familiar rhythm of conversation. Trevor regaled everyone with stories from his latest venture, something involving cryptocurrency and artisanal coffee that I was fairly certain would fail within 6 months. Celeste discussed her charity work, which mostly involved organizing galas where wealthy women could wear expensive dresses and feel good about themselves. My father held court, discussing his latest development project with the kind of passion I'd learned to recognize as his true language. When he talked about transforming empty lots into communities, about creating spaces where families could build their dreams, his entire demeanor changed. This was the man who taught me that success wasn't just about money, it was about legacy. "And the city council approved the zoning change last week," he was saying, "so we can break ground on the Riverside Commons project next month. 42 luxury townhomes, all with river views. That's wonderful, Dad," I said and meant it, whatever complicated feelings I had about my father. "I always admired his vision. It's been a long time coming," he said, his voice carrying a weight I didn't quite understand. "But sometimes you have to make difficult decisions to secure the future." Something in his tone made me uneasy, but before I could analyze it further, Celeste stood up. "I think it's time for gifts," she announced, clapping her hands together like a school teacher calling for attention. The gifts were predictable. Expensive, thoughtful, and completely divorced from any real understanding of my father's interests. A set of golf clubs from Trevor, though my father had never shown any interest in golf. A vintage wine collection from the Whitmores, duplicating bottles he already owned. A weekend getaway to Napa from Celeste, though my father preferred bourbon to wine and hated traveling. Finally, it was my turn. I stood up, my heart pounding in a way that reminded me of being 12 years old and hoping for his approval. "Dad, I wanted to give you something special. Something that represented not just this milestone birthday, but everything you've taught me about perseverance and achieving your dreams." I pulled out the velvet box, and the table fell silent. My father's expression shifted as he recognized the size and shape of the box. His eyes met mine, and for a moment, I saw something I'd rarely seen before. "Vulnerability, Vivian," he said softly. "You didn't have to." "Yes, I did." I placed the box in his hands, open it. He lifted the lid with the careful reverence of a man who understood the weight of the moment. The watch gleamed against the black velvet, its silver case catching the candlelight like captured stars. The silence stretched for what felt like hours. My father stared at the watch, his face unreadable, around the table. The guests leaned forward, trying to get a better look. "Is that... Harrison Whitmore's voice trailed off. "A 1962 Rolex Daytona," I said. My voice steadied despite the hammering of my heart. I remembered you showing me the picture when I was little. You said someday you'd own one like it. My father's hand trembled slightly as he lifted the watch from the box. The weight of it seemed to surprise him, and I realized he was calculating its value, understanding the magnitude of what I'd just given him. Vivian, he said finally, this is extraordinary. Around the table, I heard the quiet sounds of impressed murmurs. This wasn't just a gift, it was a statement, a demonstration that his daughter, the one who'd chosen a different path, had achieved something remarkable. I wanted you to know, I said, sitting back down, that everything you taught me about success, about building something meaningful, it wasn't wasted. I built my career on the foundation you gave me. And I wanted to give you something that represented that. For a moment, I thought I saw tears in his eyes. He fastened the watch around his wrist, and it looked perfect there, as if it had always belonged to him. Thank you, he said, and his voice carried a warmth I hadn't heard in years. I don't know what to say. You don't have to say anything, I replied. Just know that I love you. And I'm proud to be your daughter. The moment stretched between us, golden and perfect. Around the table, the guests smiled with the kind of satisfaction that comes from witnessing genuine emotion. This was what I'd been waiting for. This recognition, this acceptance, this moment when my father finally saw me as I was. Then Trevor cleared his throat. Well, he said, his voice carrying an edge I couldn't quite identify. I suppose this is as good a time as any to share our news. News? I looked around the table, suddenly aware that the atmosphere had shifted. The smiles were still there, but they carried a different quality now. Anticipation mixed with something that looked almost like pity. What news? I asked, though part of me already knew I didn't want to hear the answer. Trevor stood up, raising his wine glass. I wanted to announce that Dad has made me a full partner in Ashford Properties. And more than that, he's transferring ownership of the family home to me, effective immediately. The words hit me like a physical blow. I felt the blood drain from my face as I processed what he'd just said. What? I managed to whisper. My father couldn't meet my eyes. Vivian, I've been trying to find the right time to tell you. Tell me what? My voice was sharper now, cutting through the polite murmur of conversation. Trevor is the future of the family. Business? Celeste said, her voice carrying the satisfied tone of someone who'd orchestrated this moment. He understands the legacy, the responsibility. The responsibility? I stood up so quickly that my chair scraped against the floor. Trevor has never held a job for more than 6 months. He's failed at every venture he's ever attempted. What responsibility? Vivian, my father said, his voice carrying the warning tone I remembered from childhood. This is neither the time nor the place. Then when is the time? I demanded. When were you planning to tell me that you were giving away my inheritance? When were you planning to mention that the house I grew up in, the house that's been in our family for 3 generations, was being handed to someone who's never worked a day in his life? The dining room fell silent except for the sound of my own breathing, harsh and rapid in the still air. It's not about inheritance, my father said finally. It's about who can carry on the family name, the family tradition. The family name? I laughed, but there was no humor in it. You mean the family name that I've been building my entire career? The family name that I've brought honor to through my work? What you do it's not the same thing, my father said, and I could hear the discomfort in his voice. You work with numbers, with abstractions. Trevor understands real estate, development, building communities. I understand building too. I said, my voice deadly quiet. I understand building wealth, building value, building something from nothing, but apparently that doesn't count because I'm not a man. The accusation hung in the air like smoke. Around the table, the guests shifted uncomfortably, their eyes focused on their plates. That's not what this is about, my father said, but his voice lacked conviction. Isn't it? I looked around the table, seeing the faces of people who'd known me since childhood. People who'd watched me excel at everything I'd ever attempted. People who were now witnessing my father choose my stepbrother over me simply because he carried a Y chromosome. Vivian, Trevor said, his voice carrying mock sympathy. You have to understand, you have your own life, your own career. You don't need this the way I do. I don't need this. I stared at him, seeing him clearly for perhaps the first time. I don't need the house where I grew up. I don't need to know that my father values me as much as he values the son he gained through marriage. That's enough, my father said, standing up. This is my birthday dinner, and I won't have it ruined by dramatics. Dramatics, the word cut deeper than any physical blow could have. My legitimate pain, my justified anger, my reasonable expectation that I would be treated as an equal, all of it dismissed as dramatics. I looked down at the watch on my father's wrist, the watch that had cost me $180,000 and represented everything I'd hoped to achieve with this gesture. He followed my gaze, and I saw understanding dawn in his eyes. Take it off, I said quietly. Vivian, take it off. My voice was louder now, cutting through the shocked silence. That watch represents my love for you, my respect for you, my belief that you saw me as your daughter. Since you've made it clear that's not the case, I'll be taking it back. My father's face went pale. You can't. You gave it to me. I gave it to my father, I said, walking around the table toward him. But you're not my father, you're just a man who happened to contribute half my DNA. My father would have seen my worth. My father would have valued. At the doorway, I turned back. 8 faces stared at me from around the birthday table. Some shocked, some embarrassed, some satisfied. My father sat rigid in his chair, his jaw clenched, his hands folded on the table where the watch had been. Enjoy your legacy, I said, looking directly at Trevor. I hope it's everything you deserve. Then I walked out of the house where I'd grown up, the house that was no longer mine, the house that had never really been mine. The rain had stopped. But the streets of Charlottesville were still slick with water, reflecting the streetlights like scattered diamonds. I drove through the familiar neighborhoods of my childhood, past the country club where I'd learned to play tennis, past the private school where I'd been valedictorian, past the church where I'd been confirmed and where I'd assumed someday I'd be married. All of it felt like someone else's life now. I pulled into the parking garage of my downtown condo and sat in the car for a long moment, staring at the watch. In my palm, the Rolex seemed to mock me with its perfection, its precision, its promise of time that could be measured and predicted and controlled. Time I'd spent 32 years trying to earn my father's respect, trying to prove that I was worthy of his love, trying to demonstrate that my achievements mattered. I'd built a career that most people could only dream of, accumulated wealth that gave me freedom and power, created a life that should have made any parent proud. But it hadn't been enough. It would never be enough. Because I wasn't Trevor, I wasn't the son he'd gained through marriage, the male heir, who could carry on the family name, the chosen one who understood real business because he'd been born with the right chromosomes. I took the elevator to the 10th floor, to the penthouse condo I'd bought 2 years ago with the bonus from my first major deal. The space was everything the family home wasn't: modern, clean, mine, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the city, and I could see the lights of the university campus in the distance. I poured myself 3 fingers of Macallan 25. The bottle had cost me $2,000. But tonight felt like a $2,000 kind of night, and sat in my living room, staring out at the city I'd conquered while my family had barely noticed. My phone buzzed with a text from Trevor. I'm sorry it happened like this. You know, I care about you. I deleted the message without responding. Another text, this one from Celeste. Your father is very upset. Perhaps you should apologize. I blocked her number, then a call from my father. I let it go to voicemail, then played back the message. Vivian, I know you're hurt, but you have to understand. This is about more than you. This is about the family, about the future. Call me when you're ready to discuss this rationally. Rationally, as if my reaction to being disinherited and dismissed was somehow irrational. I deleted the message and poured myself another drink. Then I opened my laptop and began to research. 1247 Magnolia Street, the family home, the Georgian mansion that had been in the Ashford family for 3 generations, that my great-grandfather had built with tobacco money, that my grandfather had renovated with steel money, that my father had maintained with real estate money. I'd grown up thinking of it as a fortress, an immutable symbol of family legacy and permanence, but houses, like everything else, were just assets, and assets had value, and value could be quantified, analyzed, and acquired. The Charlottesville County property records were surprisingly easy to access, within 20 minutes. I had the full history of 1247 Magnolia Street laid out in front of me. Purchase price in 1952, $45,000. Renovation costs in 1978, $120,000. Current assessed value, $2, $8 million, but that was just the county assessment. I pulled up recent comparable sales in the neighborhood, adjusted for square footage and amenities, and ran the numbers through the pricing models I used for commercial real estate. Conservative estimate, $32 million. Realistic estimate, $38 million. Optimistic estimate, $45 million. The house was worth more than my father's entire business. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the numbers on the screen. My father had just given Trevor a $38 million asset, plus partnership in a business that generated roughly $2 million in annual revenue. He'd handed my stepbrother a fortune while dismissing me as someone who worked with numbers. The irony was almost amusing. If only he knew how good I was with numbers. I dug deeper into the property records, looking for liens, mortgages, encumbrances. What I found made my blood run cold. The house was mortgaged, heavily mortgaged. According to the records, my father had taken out a second mortgage 3 years ago for $12 million. Then another line of credit for $500,000 8 months ago. Then a third mortgage for $300,000 6 months ago. The total debt against the house was $21 million on a property worth $38 million. That left equity of $17 million, assuming the market held and assuming the mortgages were current. I pulled up my father's business records, the ones that were publicly available. Ashford Properties had been struggling. The commercial real estate market had been volatile. Construction costs had skyrocketed, and several of his development projects had been delayed or canceled. He'd been borrowing against the house to keep the business afloat, and now he'd given that house, with its massive debt load, to Trevor. I should have felt satisfied justice had a way of working itself out, and Trevor was about to inherit a financial nightmare. But instead, I felt something else. Opportunity. I picked up my phone and dialed a number I knew by heart. Marcus? It's Vivian. I need you to look into something for me. Marcus Chen was the best private investigator I'd ever worked with. Discreet and thorough, I'd used him for due diligence on several acquisitions, and he'd never failed to uncover the truth. What do you need? He asked, his voice professionally neutral. I need a complete financial workup on Ashford Properties, Richard Ashford, owner. I want to know about every loan, every debt, every liability. I want to know about cash flow, projected revenues, pending litigation. I want to know everything. This is about your father's company, Marcus said. It wasn't a question. Yes, family business can be complicated. It's not family business anymore, I said, and realized I meant it. It's just business. I'll have a report for you by tomorrow evening. Make it tomorrow morning, and Marcus, I need this to be completely confidential. Of course. Should I ask why? I looked out at the city lights, thinking about my father sitting in his dining room wearing his new watch, except he wasn't wearing it anymore. Because I'd taken it back, I thought about Trevor celebrating his inheritance, probably planning how he'd redecorate the house, how he'd finally prove himself worthy of the family name. Let's just say I'm considering an acquisition, I said. Marcus's report arrived at 7 a.m. sharp. Delivered to my office by courier, I'd been at my desk since 5:30. Unable to sleep, running scenarios in my head, the report was worse than I'd expected. Ashford Properties was hemorrhaging money. The Riverside Commons project, the one my father had been so excited about at dinner was 3 months behind schedule and $800,000 over budget. The zoning approval he'd mentioned had come with conditions that would require additional environmental studies and infrastructure improvements, adding another $12 million to the project cost. 2 of his other developments had been put on hold indefinitely due to permit issues. A third had been canceled after the primary investor pulled out, leaving my father liable for $600,000 in sunk costs. The company's cash flow was negative $200,000 per month. At the current burn rate, Ashford Properties would be insolvent within 6 months. But the real bombshell was on page 12 of the report. Harrison entered my office looking every one of his 72 years. His usually perfect appearance was disheveled, his tie slightly askew, his silver hair uncombed. He took the seat across from my desk without waiting for an invitation. "Vivian," he said, his voice heavy with exhaustion. "We need to talk." "About what?" "About your father, about what happened last night, about what you're planning to do." I kept my expression neutral. "I'm not planning to do anything. I'm simply trying to understand my family's financial situation." "Don't." Harrison's voice was sharp. "Don't play games with me, Vivian. I've known you since you were 5 years old. I know when you're plotting something." "I'm not plotting, I'm analyzing. Your father is in trouble. I'm aware of that. Are you aware that he's been trying to protect you?" I laughed, but there was no humor in it. Protect me? By giving away my inheritance? By choosing Trevor over me? By making sure you weren't tied to a failing business? Harrison said quietly. By ensuring that when everything comes crashing down, you're not buried in the rubble. The words hit me like a physical blow. What are you talking about? Father knows his business is failing. He's known for months. The transfer of the house to Trevor, the partnership offer, it's all designed to keep you out of a legal mess that's coming. That's not what he said last night. What was he supposed to say? That he was protecting you from bankruptcy. That he was saving you from having to watch the family business collapse. That he was giving Trevor the poison chalice so you could keep your reputation intact. I stared at Harrison, trying to process what he was telling me. If that's true, then why didn't he just tell me? Because he's proud? Because he's ashamed? Because he didn't want you to know that the great Richard Ashford, the man who'd built a real estate empire, was about to lose everything? And because he thought I was too weak to handle it? No, Harrison said firmly. Because he thought you were too strong to waste your life trying to save something that couldn't be saved? I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the city below. So what you're telling me is that my father sacrificed our relationship to protect my financial future. I'm telling you that your father made a choice. Maybe it was the right choice, maybe it wasn't. But it wasn't made out of favoritism or sexism or any of the things you accused him of last night. And Trevor? Trevor doesn't know your father. Is hoping that with fresh leadership and new ideas, maybe the company can be turned around. It's a long shot, but it's the only shot he has. I turned back to Harrison. What do you want from me? I want you to think very carefully about what you do next. I know you're angry. I know you're hurt. But your father loves you, Emily. He's just terrible at showing it. If he loves me, why doesn't he trust me enough to tell me the truth? Harrison was quiet for a long moment. Because he raised you to be successful. And he's afraid that if you know the truth, you'll sacrifice your success to save him. And he'd rather lose his relationship with you than watch you destroy your future after. Harrison left. I sat alone in my office, staring at Marcus's report. The numbers were stark. Unforgiving, absolute. Ashford Properties was dying, and my father had tied himself to its fate. But numbers, unlike emotions, could be manipulated. Situations could be restructured. Debts could be renegotiated. Companies could be saved. The question was, did I want to save it? I picked up my phone and dialed a number. Marcus? It's Emily again. I need you to look into something else for me. 3 weeks later, I stood in the lobby of Charlottesville Community Bank, waiting for my appointment with James Morrison, the Senior Vice President of Commercial Lending. I'd done my homework. Morrison was 45, Harvard MBA, 15 years at the bank, he'd handled several of my father's loans. And according to my research, he was getting nervous about Ashford. Property's ability to repay. Ms. Ashford, Morrison said, emerging from the elevator with a professional smile. Thank you for coming in. His office was standard banker decor. Dark wood, leather chairs, diplomas on the wall, the kind of space designed to project stability. And trustworthiness, I'd been in dozens of similar offices. And I knew how to read the subtle signals. Morrison was worried. I understand you're interested in discussing some loan opportunities, he said, settling behind his desk. Actually, I said, placing my business card on the desk, I'm here about Ashford Properties. His expression shifted slightly. I'm afraid. I can't discuss another client's financial situation. I'm not asking you to discuss it. I'm asking you to listen to a proposal. I opened my briefcase and pulled out a folder. Ashford Properties currently owes this bank approximately $21 million across 3 different loans. The company is behind on payments, and your risk assessment department has flagged the account for potential default. Morrison's poker face was good, but not perfect. I saw the recognition in his eyes. I'm prepared to assume all of Ashford Properties. Debt with this bank, I continued. Full payment, immediate transfer, no questions asked. Miss Ashford, I don't understand. It's simple. I write you a check for $21 million, and in exchange, you transfer all of Ashford Properties' loan agreements. To me, the company's debt obligations become my debt obligations. Morrison leaned back in his chair. That's highly unusual, but not illegal and not unprecedented. It's called debt assumption, and it happens in corporate restructuring all the time. Why would you want to do that? I smiled, because I believe in the long-term potential of the company, and because I have the resources to see it through its current difficulties. Miss Ashford, I have to ask, does your father know about this? My father and I have had some disagreements about business strategy. But this isn't about our relationship. This is about a sound investment opportunity. Morrison was quiet for a long moment, studying the papers I'd given him. The paperwork. A loan would take several weeks. I'm prepared to expedite the process. I have attorneys standing by to handle the documentation. We could have this completed within 10 days. And if I decline, then Ashford Properties will likely default within the next 3 months. And you'll be forced to begin foreclosure proceedings. You'll recover some of your money, but certainly not all of it. And you'll have the public relations nightmare of foreclosing on a family business that's been a pillar of the community for 3 decades. Morrison was a smart man. He could see the mathematics as clearly as I could. I'll need to discuss this with my supervisors, he said finally. Of course. But I'll need an answer by the end of the week. As I left the bank, I felt the familiar thrill of a complex deal coming together. This was what I was good at. Seeing the angles, understanding the leverage, finding the solution that served everyone's interests. Well, almost everyone's interests. The call came on Friday afternoon. Morrison's voice was carefully neutral. Ms. Ashford, we're prepared to accept your proposal. Can you be here Monday morning with the necessary documentation? I'll be there at 9 a.m., I said. I spent the weekend with my attorneys, finalizing the paperwork. The debt assumption agreement was straightforward. I would pay off all of Ashford Properties' outstanding loans, and in exchange, the bank would transfer all rights and obligations to me. The company would owe me $21 million instead of owing the bank, but that was just the beginning. On Monday morning, I walked into Morrison's office with a certified check for $21 million. We signed the papers, shook hands, and suddenly I owned my father's company's debt. By Tuesday, I owned the company. I gave my father 24 hours to pay the $21 million he owed me. Of course, he couldn't pay. That was the point. So I foreclosed on the business assets, and Ashford Properties became a wholly owned subsidiary of Meridian Strategic Holdings. My company, my rules, the irony wasn't lost on me. My father had spent 32 years telling me I didn't understand real business. Now I owned his. My father's office was exactly as I remembered it from childhood visits. Mahogany desk, Leather chairs, family photos carefully arranged to project success and stability. He looked older than he had 3 weeks ago. The stress of the financial crisis etched in new lines around his eyes. Trevor sat beside him, looking confused and angry. He'd been planning to take over a thriving business. Instead, he discovered he was now an employee of his stepsister's company. "Vivian," my father said as I entered. His voice was carefully controlled, but I could hear the exhaustion underneath. "I suppose congratulations are in order." "Thank you," I said, taking the seat across from his desk. "I appreciate your acknowledgement. What do you want?" Trevor's voice was sharp with accusation. "You've humiliated us, destroyed the family business, made us look like fools in front of the entire community. What more could you possibly want?" "I want to save the company," I said simply, "and I want to save the family home." The silence that followed was profound. My father stared at me, his expression unreadable. "What are you talking about?" he asked finally. "The house is mortgaged for $21 million. The mortgage payments are $18,000 per month. Trevor, in his new position as junior partner, I suppose, makes $75,000 per year. That's roughly $6,200 per month. Before taxes, even if he lived on nothing but air and good intentions, he couldn't afford the mortgage payments." Trevor's face went white. "What mortgage payments?" I turned to my father. "You didn't tell him about the debt, did you? You just transferred the house to his name without explaining that it came with $21 million in obligations. You were going to handle it how?" I interrupted. "With what money? The company has been losing $200,000 per month. Your personal accounts are overdrawn. Your retirement fund has been liquidated to pay operating expenses. What exactly were you planning to handle it with?" My father looked at Trevor, then back at me. "What do you propose?" "I propose we restructure everything. The company, the debt, the family arrangements. I propose we start over with honesty instead of pride." "And what would that look like?" my father asked. I opened my briefcase and pulled out a folder. "Ashford Properties becomes a division of Meridian Strategic Holdings. You remain as president, but you report to me. Trevor can stay as a junior partner, but he'll need to actually learn the business instead of just inheriting it. And the house? I'll assume the mortgage payments, the house stays in Trevor's name, but I hold the note. If he can't make the payments, I foreclose." Trevor stood up abruptly. "This is insane. You're talking about making us employees of our own company." "No," I said calmly. "I'm talking about saving your company and your house and your future. At what cost?" My father asked. "What do you get out of this?" I leaned back in my chair, considering the question. What did I want? Revenge? Vindication? Proof that I was worthy of respect? "I want the truth," I said finally. "I want honesty about the family finances, about the business, about the decisions that affect all of us. I want to be treated as a partner, not as a child who can't handle complexity. And if we refuse, then you lose everything. The company goes into bankruptcy. The house gets foreclosed. Trevor's inheritance becomes a pile of debt, and you spend your retirement years working to pay off creditors." My father was quiet for a long moment. "You've thought this through." "I've thought of little else for the past 3 weeks. And you think this arrangement would work?" "I think it's the only arrangement that has a chance of working." Trevor slumped back into his chair. "So you're saying I don't actually inherit anything. I get to live in a house that you own, working for a company that you own, hoping that someday you'll decide I'm worthy of what?" "I'm saying you get to earn something instead of just inheriting it," I replied. "I'm saying you get to prove that you deserve the family name instead of just wearing it. And if I don't want to prove anything, if I just want what was promised to me, then you're welcome to leave, but you'll leave with nothing because there is nothing. Everything you thought you were inheriting is actually debt." The brutal honesty of it hung in the air between us. My father stared at his hands. Trevor stared at the floor, and I stared at both of them. These men who'd shaped my life in ways they probably didn't even understand. "There's one more thing," I said. "The watch." My father looked up. What about it? I want to give it to you again, but this time I want to give it to someone who sees me as an equal, not as a disappointment. I pulled the Rolex from my purse and placed it on the desk between us. Happy birthday, Dad. I hope this year brings you everything you actually want, not just everything you think you should want. My father picked up the watch, his hands trembling slightly. Vivian, I'm sorry for all of it. For not trusting you, for not seeing what you were capable of, for making decisions that hurt you. I know, I said, and I'm sorry too, for taking so long to understand that sometimes love looks like protection. Even when it feels like rejection, Trevor was staring at both of us like we were speaking a foreign language. So what happens now? Now, I said, standing up, we get to work. We save the company, we save the house, and we figure out how to be a family that actually talks to each other. And if it doesn't work, then at least we'll fail honestly instead of succeeding through. Deception? 6 months later, I stood in the conference room of Ashford Properties, looking at the quarterly financial reports. The numbers were still challenging, but they were moving in the right direction. The company was no longer hemorrhaging money, and 2 of the stalled development projects had been successfully refinanced and were back on track. Trevor sat across the table from me, his sleeves rolled up, his tie loosened, looking more like a working businessman than the dilettante he'd been 6 months ago. He'd thrown himself into learning the business with a dedication that surprised everyone, including himself. The Riverside Commons project is ahead of schedule, he was saying, pointing to a chart on his laptop. The environmental studies came back clean, and we found a way to incorporate the required infrastructure improvements into the overall design. We're actually going to come in under budget. That's excellent, I said and meant it. What about the other projects? Highland Terrace is ready to break ground next month. Oakwood Estates is still waiting for final permits, but the city says we should have approval by the end of the quarter. My father nodded approvingly. Good work, Trevor. You're finally starting to understand the business. I'm starting to understand a lot of things, Trevor said, glancing at me, including why Vivian was so angry that night. It had taken months, but we'd gradually built something resembling a functional working relationship. Trevor had proven to be more capable than anyone had expected. Once Trevor leaned forward. What would that look like? It would look like a real estate empire instead of a family business. It would look like expansion into Richmond, Norfolk, maybe even Washington, D.C. It would look like the kind of legacy that could support multiple generations instead of just one. My father was quiet for a long moment. You're talking about changing everything. I'm talking about saving everything. The residential market made us successful, but it won't keep us successful. Forever, we need to evolve. And you think we can do that? I think we can do anything if we work together instead of against each other. The silence stretched between us, full of possibility and uncertainty. Finally, my father spoke. Tell me about this proposal. 1 year after the birthday dinner that changed everything, I stood in the same dining room at 1247 Magnolia Street, but the atmosphere couldn't have been more different. Instead of 8 guests celebrating my father's birthday, we had 25 people celebrating the launch of Ashford Meridian Development Group. The company had grown beyond anything my father had imagined. We'd completed 4 major commercial developments, had 6 more in various stages of planning, and were looking at expansion into 3 new markets. The financial projections showed revenue growth of 300% over the next 5 years. But more than that, we'd rebuilt something that had been broken for decades. Trust. Ladies and gentlemen, my father said, raising his glass of champagne, I want to thank you all for being here tonight to celebrate not just a business milestone, but a family milestone. He was wearing the Rolex I'd given him, and every time I saw it, I felt a little surge of satisfaction, not because of the watch itself, but because of what it represented, a gift given in love and received in understanding. A year ago, he continued, I made some decisions that nearly destroyed the most important relationships in my life. I thought I was protecting my family, but I was actually pushing them away. I thought I knew what was best for everyone, but I was actually too proud to admit I needed help. He looked at me and I saw the genuine affection in his eyes. My daughter taught me that real strength isn't about never needing help. It's about accepting help when it's offered and offering it when it's needed. Trevor stood up. I'd like to say something too. He looked nervous, but determined. A year ago, I thought I deserved success just because I was born into the right family. I thought inheritance was the same thing as achievement. My sister taught me that nothing worthwhile is ever given to you. It has to be earned. And what did? You learn? I asked, genuinely curious. I learned that earning something is a lot more satisfying than just receiving it. I learned that I'm actually capable of more than I thought I was. And I learned that having a brilliant sister isn't a threat to my masculinity. It's an advantage I should be grateful for. The room erupted in applause, and I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Belonging later. After the guests had gone home and the caterers had cleaned up, I sat with my father and Trevor in the library, sharing a bottle of 30-year-old Macallan. So what happens now? Trevor asked. Now we keep building, I said. We expand the business. We strengthen the family and we create something that will last for generations. And if we fail, then we fail together, my father said. But I don't think we're going to fail. Why not? Because we finally understand what we're really building. It's not just a business. It's not just a family legacy. It's a partnership based on mutual respect and shared goals. I lifted my glass. To partnership. To family. Trevor said, to the future, my father added. We clinked glasses. And for the first time in my adult life, I felt like I truly belonged. In this house, with these people and this family that had finally learned to see me as I was. 2 years later, I stood in the courthouse in downtown Charlottesville, watching as my father signed the final papers that would transfer 50% ownership of Ashford Meridian Development Group to me and 25% to Trevor. The remaining 25% would stay with my father, ensuring that his voice would always be heard in major decisions. It wasn't the inheritance I'd expected, but it was the partnership I'd always wanted. Are you sure about this? The attorney asked my father one final time. This is a substantial transfer of assets. I'm sure, my father said, his voice steady. My children have earned this. Both of them, Trevor grinned. Does this mean I finally get to redecorate the house? The house is yours, I said. But if you paint anything pink, I'm calling in the mortgage. Pink? What do you think I am? A college freshman. I think you're my brother, I said, surprising myself with the word. And I think you have questionable taste in interior design. Your brother? Trevor's voice was soft. You called me your brother. That's what you are, isn't it? My annoying little brother who's finally learned to do his own laundry and make his own success. I'm not that little. I'm only 4 years younger than you and a lifetime behind me in maturity. Hey! My father laughed, and the sound was warm and genuine. I'm glad to see you two have found your rhythm. What rhythm? I asked. The rhythm of siblings who actually like each other. He was right. Somehow, in the process of rebuilding the business and restructuring our relationships, Trevor and I had discovered that we worked well together. He had vision and creativity. I had analytical skills and strategic thinking. He could charm clients and investors. I could negotiate contracts and manage complex financial structures. Together, we'd built something neither of us could have achieved alone. There's one more thing, my father said, pulling out a small box. I wanted to give you this. He handed me the box, and I opened it to find a simple gold pendant on a chain. It was engraved with the Ashford family crest, the one that had been carved into the mantelpiece at the house, the one that appeared on all the company letterhead. It was your grandmother's, he said. She wore it every day for 60 years. She would have wanted you to have it. I fastened the necklace around my neck, feeling the weight of history and belonging. Thank you, he said, for saving us, for teaching us, for not giving up on us even when we gave up on ourselves. I almost did give up. I admitted. That night at dinner, I was ready to walk away forever. What changed your mind? I thought about it. I realized that walking away would have been easier, but it wouldn't have been better. Fighting for what you love is always harder than abandoning it. But the things you fight for are the things that matter most. And you think we matter? I think we matter to each other. And I think that's what family really is, not the people who share your DNA, but the people who choose to keep showing up for each other, even when it's difficult. I stood in the elevator of the newest Ashford Meridian building, a 30-story mixed-use development in downtown Richmond. The elevator had a glass wall that offered a spectacular view of the James River, and I could see the construction cranes working on our next project in the distance. The company had grown beyond our wildest projections. We now had offices in 4 cities, employed over 200 people, and had been featured on the cover of Virginia Business Magazine as the development company that's reshaping the South. But more than that, we'd created something that would last. Trevor had married a brilliant architect named Sarah, and they were expecting their first child. My father had remarried a wonderful woman named Helen who actually appreciated his dry sense of humor and his passion for real estate. And I've finally learned to balance my career with my personal life, dating a federal judge named David who understood that loving me meant accepting that I would always be driven, ambitious, and occasionally ruthless in business. The elevator doors opened on the 28th floor, where we'd reserved the entire space for our family offices. My father's office faced west, toward the mountains. Trevor's faced south, toward the river. Mine faced east, toward the sunrise. Vivian? My assistant's voice came through the intercom. Your father and Trevor are here for the 3 o'clock meeting. Send them in. They entered together, both of them looking older and more distinguished than they had 5 years ago. Trevor carried himself with the confidence of a man who'd proven himself through his own efforts. My father moved with the satisfaction of someone who'd successfully passed on his legacy to the next generation. Are you ready for this? Trevor asked, settling into one of the leather chairs across from my desk. Ready for what? Ready to hear that the New York project has been approved. Ready to hear that we are about to become a regional powerhouse. Ready to hear that your little sister, your little brother, has just negotiated the biggest deal in the company's history. I leaned back in my chair, smiling. Tell me everything. For the next hour, Trevor walked us through the details of the Manhattan development deal, a $500 million mixed-use project that would establish Ashford Meridian as a major player in the New York market. The numbers were staggering. The opportunity was unprecedented, and the risk was substantial. What do you think? My father asked when Trevor finished his presentation. I think it's ambitious. I said, I think it's risky. I think it's exactly the kind of challenge that will define the next decade of our company. So, we're doing it? We're doing it, Trevor. And I love it when you say, we. What do you mean? I mean that 5 years ago, you were ready to walk away from all of us. Now you're talking about we and our company and our future. It's nice to know that you finally consider us worthy partners. You earned it, I said. Both of you. You earned my respect, my trust, and my partnership, and you earned ours, my father said. Though I have to admit, there were times when I wondered if you were going to destroy us all out of spite. I considered it, I said honestly, but spite is a terrible foundation for a business plan. What is a good foundation? I thought about it, looking out at the city we'd helped build, thinking about the family we'd fought to preserve, considering the future we were still creating. Love, I said finally. Love is the only foundation that lasts. That's very philosophical. For a woman who just spent an hour analyzing profit margins. I'm a complex person, I replied. I can love my family and still negotiate a killer contract. Speaking of which, Trevor said, Sarah and I have news. What kind of news? We're naming the baby after you. If it's a girl, her name will be Victoria Vivian Ashford. If it's a boy, his name will be Vincent Vivian Ashford. You're naming a boy Vivian. Vincent Vivian, it has a nice ring to it. It sounds like a law firm. Maybe he'll be a lawyer. Or she be a lawyer, or maybe they'll be a developer like their aunt. I felt something shift in my chest, a warmth that had nothing to do with business success or financial achievement. You're naming your child after me. We're naming our child after the woman who saved our family, Trevor said. After the woman who taught us that love sometimes looks like tough decisions. And that family is something you build, not something you inherit. I looked at my father, who was smiling with the kind of satisfaction that comes from watching your children become better than you ever imagined they could be. Are you happy with how things turned out? I asked him, are you? I'm happy that we learned to fight for each other instead of against each other. I'm happy that we built something together that's bigger than any of us could have built alone. I'm happy that we turned our biggest crisis into our greatest opportunity. And I'm happy, my father said, that I raised a daughter who was strong enough to save us all, including herself. 5 years ago, I'd sat in the same city, in a different office, planning what I thought was revenge against the family that had rejected me. I thought I was orchestrating their destruction, but I'd actually been orchestrating their salvation, and mine, because sometimes the most powerful revenge is refusing to let the people you love destroy themselves. Sometimes the greatest victory is turning your enemies into partners, and sometimes the most profound justice is discovering that the thing you thought you'd lost, your family's love, was actually there all along, waiting for you to be strong enough to fight for it. Have you ever had to choose between peace and family? Sometimes the most powerful revenge is walking away, but sometimes the most powerful love is refusing to let go. My father told me to leave, so I bought the house and evicted him. From his old way of thinking, from his pride, from his fear of trusting me with the truth. The house is still in the family. The business is stronger than ever. And we're still learning how to be the family we were always meant to be. If my story resonated with you, hit like, subscribe to Silent Revenge, and share your truth in the comments, because sometimes justice whispers and still echoes forever. And sometimes the loudest whisper is the one that says, I choose to love you enough to save you from yourself.